In the gleaming towers of the corporate district, a quietly successful creative director was about to face the ghosts of his deepest betrayal. What started as a routine business pitch took a shocking turn when he came face to face with the woman who had shattered his heart 3 years earlier. Akiro Tsukihara wasn't your typical advertising executive for 3 years. He had transformed pain into professional triumph, known for his ability to see emotional truth where others saw only surface. When he encountered Emma Richardson desperately, pleading for his help, he had no idea he was walking into a choice between redemption and revenge that would reshape all their lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Akiro Tsukihara's corner office, casting geometric shadows across the polished concrete floor. He sat motionless behind his minimalist desk, fingers steepled as he studied the portfolio spread before him, a carefully curated collection of his agency's triumphs over the past 3 years. Each campaign represented more than creative success. They were monuments to his transformation, proof that betrayal could be alchemized into something greater than gold. The Meridian Hotel's campaign stared back at him from the glossy pages, "Rise above." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd pitched that tagline during his darkest hour, when rising above anything seemed impossible. Now, the campaign had won 3 Cannes Lions and secured Tsukihara Creative's reputation as the boutique agency that delivered miracles. "You're doing it again." Sarah Mitchell's voice cut through his reverie. His business partner stood in the doorway, her auburn hair catching the light as she studied him. With those perceptive green eyes that had seen through his carefully constructed walls from day one, that look you get when you're thinking about going back. Akiro's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. "The Hartwell Group pitch is worth $12 million annually. We'd be foolish not to pursue it. We'd be foolish to let you pursue it." Sarah entered the office, closing the door behind her with the quiet authority that made her such an effective partner. "David's already called me twice this morning. He's worried sick." As if summoned by her words, David Park appeared at the glass wall, separating Akiro's office from the main workspace. The older man's weathered face bore the expression of someone who'd seen too many promising careers derailed by unresolved ghosts. At 62, David had been Akiro's mentor, savior, and surrogate father, all rolled into one. He'd been the one. To find Akiro 3 years ago, broken, brilliant, and burning with the need to prove something to himself and the world. David knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. "Please tell me you're not seriously considering this." "The Hartwell Group specifically requested us," Akiro said, his voice maintaining its characteristic calm. "Our healthcare campaigns caught their attention. It's exactly the kind of account that could establish us as what? A major player?" David's gray eyebrows knitted together. "Son, you've already proven everything you need to prove. This isn't about business. This is about going back to a place that nearly destroyed you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Akiro's gaze drifted to the window, where the city sprawled beneath them, a maze of steel and glass that held 3 years of carefully avoided memories. Somewhere in that urban landscape were the offices of Richardson and Associates, where he'd once believed in love and loyalty with the fervor of a true believer. The memory surfaced unbidden, as it always did when his defenses were down. That night 3 years ago, when he'd returned to the office late to retrieve files he'd forgotten, the soft sounds from Emma's corner office that had made him pause, then the sight that had shattered his world, Emma and Marcus, his girlfriend and best friend, entwined on the leather sofa where they'd all shared countless late-night strategy sessions. He'd stood frozen in the doorway for exactly 7 seconds. He'd counted them later. During the sleepless nights that followed, 7 seconds of watching his life disintegrate while they remained oblivious to his presence. Marcus's hands in, Emma's dark hair, her legs wrapped around his waist. Both of them lost in a passion that Akiro had never seen in Emma's eyes when she looked at him. He'd turned and walked away without a word, just as he'd done with everything else that night. No confrontation, no shouting match, no dramatic declarations. He'd simply erased himself from their lives with the quiet efficiency that had become his trademark, Akiro. Sarah's voice pulled him back to the present. She was closer now, her hand hovering just above his shoulder, but not quite touching. She'd learned early in their partnership that he didn't respond well to unexpected contact. You don't have to do this. We have other opportunities. Better. Opportunities that don't involve what? My past. Akiro finally looked up, meeting her concerned gaze. I can't spend my entire career avoiding a city. Because of what happened here. Besides, Richardson and Associates is struggling. I've seen the industry reports. Their last 3 campaigns have been disasters. Satisfaction in his voice was subtle, but unmistakable. Sarah caught it immediately, her lips pressing into a thin line. That's what this is really about, isn't it? She said quietly. You want to watch them fail. I want to succeed. Kiro's correction was swift and precise. If their failure coincides with my success, that's simply the natural order of things. David exchanged a look with Sirwan of those wordless communications that longtime colleagues develop. Akiro, revenge is a luxury you can't afford. Not when you've built something this good. This isn't about revenge. Akiro stood, straightening his charcoal suit jacket with practiced precision. This is about business. The Hartwell Group wants fresh perspective on their rebranding initiative. They want innovation, risk-taking, the kind of creative thinking that Richardson and Associates clearly can't provide anymore. He moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the cityscape. At 31, success had carved away the softness that had once made him approachable. His face was leaner now, more angular, with the kind of quiet intensity that made clients lean forward when he spoke. The round glasses he'd worn in his younger days had been replaced by contacts, and his hair was cut shorter, more severe. He looked like what he'd become, a man who'd learned that armor was more reliable than trust. Emma Richardson will be there, David said quietly. You know that, right? And Marcus. The names hit like a physical blow, but Akiro's expression remained unchanged. I assumed as much. They're married now, Sarah added, watching his face. Carefully, have been for 2 years. This time something flickered across Akiro's features, too quick to identify, gone before either of his partners could analyze it.
Congratulations to them.
The intercom on his desk buzzed softly. Tsukihara. The Hartwell Group is online too. They'd like to confirm your participation in Thursday's pitch meeting. Akiro looked at Sarah, then at David. Both wore expressions of resignation mixed with concern. They'd been through too much together for them to abandon him now, but they wouldn't pretend to support a decision they believed was self-destructive. Tell them yes, Akiro said to the intercom, his eyes never leaving his partner's faces. We'll be there. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, as if accepting an inevitable fate. David simply shook his head, the gesture of a man who'd seen this particular tragedy before. Then we do this together, Sarah said finally. All the way. But I want you to promise me something. What? Promise me you know why you're really doing this. Not the justifications, not the business rationale, the real reason. Akiro was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the window and the city beyond. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. I need to know if I'm strong enough to face them without flinching. If I'm not, then everything I've built here is just an elaborate form of running away. It was the most honest thing he'd said in 3 years. Sarah and David exchanged another look, this one tinged with understanding rather than concern. They knew, as Akiro was beginning to understand, that some ghosts could only be exorcised by walking directly through them. The city sprawled before them, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in its towers of glass and steel. But somewhere in that maze of ambition and broken dreams, the past was waiting to collide with the present. Akiro Tsukihara was finally ready to let it happen. The city sprawled before them, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in its towers of glass and steel. But somewhere in that maze of ambition and broken dreams, the past was waiting to collide with the present, and Akiro Tsukihara was finally ready to let it happen. 2 days later, that collision came sooner than expected. The Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom buzzed with the familiar energy of the advertising industry's monthly networking event, carefully choreographed dance of ambition, jealousy, and strategic small talk. Akiro moved through the crowd with practiced ease his presence, creating subtle ripples of recognition and whispered conversations. Success had made him a topic of discussion in certain circles, the prodigal son who disappeared and returned triumphant. "Akiro Tsukihara," someone called from behind him. "I heard you were back in town." He turned to find Janet Morrison, a veteran account director he'd known from his Richardson and Associates days. Her smile was warm but carried the particular gleam that suggested she knew exactly how volatile this situation could become. "Janet." He inclined his head politely. "How's the Morrison group treating you?" "Can't complain. Though I hear Richardson's been struggling lately. Shame, really. Victoria built that place into something special." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd meaningfully. Speaking of which, Akiro followed her gaze and felt his carefully constructed composure fracture for just a moment. Emma Richardson stood near the bar, her dark hair shorter than he remembered, framing a face that looked older, more fragile. She wore a black cocktail dress that he didn't recognize, and there was something brittle in her posture that spoke of careful maintenance rather than natural confidence. She was alone. "Excuse me, Akiro," murmured to Janet, already moving before his rational mind could intervene. Emma noticed his approach when he was still 10 feet away. Her wineglass froze halfway to her lips, her dark eyes widening with something. That might have been panic or relief. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other across the space that separated them, 3 years collapsing into nothing. "Akiro." His name on her lips was barely a whisper. "Emma." He stopped just close enough to speak without being overheard, maintaining the careful distance that had become second nature. "You look well." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Looked tired, worn in a way that expensive makeup couldn't quite conceal. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, and her smile had lost the effortless radiance that had once stopped conversations in boardrooms. "I heard you were in town." She set down her wineglass with trembling fingers. "Sarah Mitchell's agency, right? You've done incredible work. The Meridian campaign was brilliant." "Thank you." His voice remained level, professional.
Owls.
"Richardson and Associates?" The question hit like a physical blow. Emma's composure cracked slightly, revealing something raw underneath. "We're managing. These past few years have been challenging. I'm sure they have been." The words carried just enough edge to make Emma flinch. She deserved it, and they both knew it, but seeing her reaction sent an unexpected stab of something through his chest. Not quite regret, but not satisfaction either. "Akiro," she began, then stopped as a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Marcus Chen materialized beside Emma with the kind of aggressive casualness that suggested he'd been watching their interaction from across the room. He looked older, too, his boyish charm hardened into something more desperate. His suit was expensive, but didn't quite fit right. And there was a tightness around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting pressure. Marcus Akiro's acknowledgement was arctic. "Heard you were back, making quite a name for yourself, apparently." Marcus's smile was sharp-edged, predatory. "Funny how things work out, isn't it? You disappear without a word, and we all just move on." "Marcus, please," Emma whispered, her hand touching his arm in a gesture that looked more like restraint than affection. "What?" "I'm just catching up with an old friend." Marcus's eyes never left Akiro's face, though I suppose friend might be too strong a word. "What do you call someone who abandons ship without explanation?" The challenge hung in the air between them. Around their small group, conversations continued. But Akiro was aware of subtle shifts in attention, the way certain ears tuned in to potential drama. This was exactly the kind of scene that would fuel industry gossip for months, I'd call them. Smart Akiro replied quietly, "Sometimes the best business decision is knowing when to cut your losses." The barb found its mark. Marcus's jaw tightened, and Emma made a small sound that might have been a suppressed sob. "Losses," Marcus repeated. "Is that what we were to you?" "We're many things," Akiro said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of carefully controlled anger. "But you were never mine to lose." The words hit Emma like a slap. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, there were tears threatening to spill over. I think I need some air, she murmured, already moving toward the terrace doors. Marcus started to follow, but Akiro's voice stopped him cold. Let her go, excuse me. You heard me? Akiro stepped closer, close enough that only Marcus could hear his next words. You won. You got everything you wanted. Like the girl, the job, the life that was supposed to be mine. So why do you look like a man who's losing? For a moment, Marcus's carefully constructed facade cracked completely. What showed underneath was raw desperation, the kind that came from realizing that winning could sometimes be its own form of defeat. You have no idea what you're talking about, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction, don't I? Akiro straightened his tie with deliberate precision. Enjoy your evening, Marcus, and give my regards to Victoria. I'm sure she's proud of how things have turned out. He turned and walked away before Marcus could respond, leaving his former friend standing alone beside the bar with his hands clenched into fists. Akiro found Emma on the terrace, standing at the railing with her back to the door. The city lights spread out below them like a circuit board, beautiful and cold. She didn't turn when he approached, but her shoulders tensed. You didn't have to follow me, she said quietly. No, I didn't. He moved to stand beside her, maintaining careful distance. But here we are. Here we are, she echoed. God, Akiro, I'm so sorry for everything, for how it happened, for Marcus just now, for stop. The word was gentle but firm. We're not doing this, not here. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so familiar that it sent an unwelcome jolt of memory through him. You're right. Of course you're right. You always were. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history settling between them. Like sediment. The company's in trouble, she said suddenly. Real trouble. We're going to lose everything my mother built. Akiro didn't respond immediately. He'd known this was coming, had seen the signs in industry reports and whispered conversations. Richardson and Associates was hemorrhaging clients and talent, a slow-motion collapse that had been 3 years in the making. I need help, Emma continued, her voice barely audible. We need help, and I know I have no right to ask, no right to even be talking to you, but you're asking anyway. She turned to look at him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears and something that might have been hope. You're the only one who can save us. You know that company better than anyone except my mother. You understand what made it special. I understood what it used to be, Akiro corrected. That place doesn't exist anymore. It could again. With the right leadership, the right vision, she took a shaky breath. With you. The proposal hung between them like a live wire. Akiro could feel the weight of it, the implications spiraling out in directions he wasn't prepared to consider. Emma was offering him everything he'd once wanted and more control. Vindication. The chance to return as savior rather than victim. It was also potentially the most dangerous thing he'd ever been asked to do. Think about it, Emma said when he didn't respond. Please, just think about it. She touched his arm briefly, the first physical contact they'd had in 3 years, and then she was gone, leaving him alone on the terrace with the city lights and the echo of his own heartbeat. From across the ballroom, Victoria Richardson watched through the glass doors, her expression unreadable. At 71, the family matriarch had built an empire through shrewd decisions and careful timing. Now, watching her daughter plead with the man she'd once betrayed, Victoria was calculating odds and measuring desperate options. The game had changed. The question was whether any of them were prepared for what came next. The game had changed. The question was whether any of them were prepared for what came next. Victoria Richardson's call came at exactly 8 a.m. the following Monday, precision that spoke to decades of corporate discipline. Akiro stared at his phone for 3 rings before answering, knowing that this conversation would alter the trajectory of everything he'd built. Victoria Akiro. Her voice carried the same authority it always had, though he detected something underneath a hairline fracture in the foundation of her confidence. I think it's time we talked. Properly. 2 hours later, Akiro stood before the glass towers. That housed Richardson and Associates, studying the building that had once felt like home. The lobby still gleamed with polished marble and understated elegance, but there was something hollow about it now, like a theater set after the audience had gone home. The elevator carried him to the 42nd floor in silence. When the doors opened, he was struck by the subtle signs of decline, slightly faded carpeting, a receptionist's desk that used to have 2 people but now sat half empty, and the particular quiet that came when an office was operating at reduced capacity. "Mr. Tsukihara," the remaining receptionist said with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Richardson is expecting you in the conference room." The conference room. Not Victoria's office, where they'd had countless meetings during his time here. This was meant to be formal, official or business proposition, rather than a personal appeal. Victoria stood as he entered, and for a moment, they simply studied each other across the polished table. At 71, she remained formidable, her silver hair perfectly styled and her navy suit impeccable. But Akiro could see the weight she carried now, the way her shoulders held tension that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "You look well," she said, gesturing for him to sit across from her. "Success suits you. Thank you." He settled into the chair that had once been his regular seat during strategy meetings. "Though I suspect this isn't a social call." "No, it isn't." Victoria opened the leather portfolio in front of her with practiced efficiency. "I'm going to show you some numbers, Akiro. They're not pleasant, but they're honest." The financial statements she spread across the table told a story of systematic decline. Revenue down 60% over 3 years. Client retention at an all-time low. Operating costs that hadn't adjusted to match the reduced income. It was a textbook case of a company hemorrhaging money with no clear path to recovery. "Marcus's accounts," Victoria said quietly, pointing to a particularly damaging set of figures. 3 major clients. Lost in the past 18 months. The Pemberton Group, Stellar Healthcare, Morrison Industries. Akiro recognized each name. These had been foundational accounts, the kind of long-term relationships that provided stability and reputation. Losing one would have been concerning. Losing all 3 was catastrophic. How, he asked, though he suspected he already knew. Poor execution. Missed deadlines. Creative, that was. Victoria paused, choosing her words carefully. "Uninspired." "Marcus has many qualities, but your particular combination of strategic thinking and creative vision was never one of them." The admission hung between them like a confession. Victoria Richardson had built her empire on being right about people, on reading their potential and placing them where they could thrive. Choosing Marcus over Akiro had been her greatest miscalculation, and they both knew it. "The Hartwell Group pitch," Akiro said. "That's why you asked me to consider this conversation. You know, we're competing for the same account. I know you're going to win it." Victoria's smile was rueful. "Your agency's healthcare work is exactly what they're looking for. Creative, innovative, results-driven. Everything we used to be." She pulled out another document, a partnership agreement that had clearly been drafted by expensive lawyers. Akiro scanned the terms with growing surprise. This wasn't a consultation offer or a temporary arrangement. Victoria was proposing to give him controlling interest in Richardson and Associates. 60% ownership, she continued. Full creative control, authority to restructure operations as you see fit. In exchange, you provide the leadership and vision needed to save what my father and I spent 40 years building. The offer was staggering in its scope and implications. Akiro would essentially be handed control of a company that had once refused to promote him beyond junior partner. The irony was so complete it almost felt like fiction. "And Emma?" he asked. "Would report to you, as would Marcus, assuming you choose to retain his services." Victoria's tone suggested she had doubts about that particular decision. "You're asking me to become their boss?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm asking you to save this company. You choose to handle the personal dynamics is entirely up to you. The conference room door opened quietly, and Emma stepped inside. She looked as if she hadn't slept, her usual composure replaced by something raw and desperate. She glanced between Victoria and Akiro, taking in the spread of financial documents and legal papers. "You're really doing this," she said to her mother. "You're really giving him everything." "I'm trying to save everything," Victoria replied. "There's a difference." Emma moved to the window, staring out at the city skyline with her arms wrapped around herself. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Begging the man she stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The man you betrayed, Akiro supplied quietly. Emma flinched as if he'd struck her, but she didn't deny it. Yes, the man I betrayed, who now holds our entire future in his hands. The pain in her voice was genuine, and despite everything, Akiro felt an unwelcome stab of sympathy. This wasn't just about business for Emmett. It was about facing the consequences of her choices in the most public way possible. I need time to consider this, Akiro said, though part of him already knew what his answer would be. Of course, Victoria began gathering the papers. But I should mention that we have perhaps 6 weeks before we'll be forced to file for bankruptcy. You're going to save us, it needs to happen quickly. The deadline added urgency to an already complex situation. 6 weeks to decide whether to rescue the company that had shaped his career, led by the woman who had destroyed his heart, alongside the man who had been his closest friend. There would be conditions, Akiro said carefully. Name them. Complete autonomy in personnel decisions. No interference in creative or strategic choices. And he paused, meeting Emma's eyes across the room. Clear boundaries regarding personal matters. This would be strictly business, understood, Victoria said. I hope you'll consider that people can change, given the right circumstances and enough time. Emma turned from the window, her eyes bright with something that might have been hope or desperation. Akiro, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but this company, it's my mother's legacy. It's all we have left. The plea was quietly devastating. Whatever Emma had done to him personally, Richardson and Associates represented something larger, institution that had nurtured countless careers and created work that mattered. Letting it die to satisfy his wounded pride would make him as petty as he'd accused others of being. I'll have an answer for you by Friday, he said, standing to leave. Victoria nodded, extending her hand across the table. Thank you for considering this. I know it can't be easy. Her handshake was firm, professional, but Akiro caught the slight tremor in her fingers. Victoria Richardson was a woman who had controlled her own destiny for 7 decades. And now she was placing her life's work in the hands of someone she'd once underestimated. As he waited for the elevator, Emma appeared beside him. They stood in silence until the doors opened, and then she spoke just above a whisper. I know you have every reason to let us fail, but please, please don't let my mistakes destroy what she built. The elevator arrived, and Akiro stepped inside without responding. As the doors closed, he saw Emma still standing in the hallway, her reflection ghost-like in the polished metal. During the descent to the lobby, Akiro realized that he'd already made his decision. Not because of Emma's plea or Victoria's offer, but because of something simpler and more troubling. He needed to know if he was strong enough to save the people who had broken him. The question wasn't whether he could rescue Richardson and Associates. The question was whether he could do it without destroying himself in the process. That evening, Akiro found himself in Caf Luna, a quiet bistro tucked away from the main business district. It had been Jennifer Walsh's suggestion. Neutral territory where they could speak freely without the risk of industry eavesdroppers. He'd called her that afternoon, knowing he needed to hear the full story before making his final decision. Jennifer arrived 10 minutes late, her red hair catching the amber light as she scanned the room. She looked older than her 30 years. Carrying the particular weariness that came from watching friends make destructive choices, when she spotted Akiro in the corner booth, her expression was equal parts relief and apprehension. I wasn't sure you'd actually call, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. After everything that happened, I need to understand what I'm walking into, Akiro replied, studying her face. Jennifer had always been Emma's conscience, the friend who told uncomfortable truths when everyone else offered comfortable lies. If anyone knew the real story, it would be her. Jennifer ordered wine something stronger than her usual and spent a long moment staring into the glass after it arrived.
How much do you want to know?
Because once I start talking, can't unknow any of it. All of it. She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected that answer. The night you found them, Emma called me 3 hours later. She was hysterical, completely broken. She'd realized what she'd done the moment it was over, but by then you were already gone. Akiro's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Regret. After the fact isn't the same as not doing it in the first place. No, it's not. But it matters. Jennifer took a sip of wine, gathering courage. She tried to find you. Called your apartment dozens of times, went to your favorite places, even hired a private investigator when you seemed to have vanished completely. I was at David's cabin in Vermont for 2 weeks, then moved to Chicago. The words came out. Flatter than he'd intended. I wasn't hiding. Just didn't want to be found. She figured that out eventually. But Marcus. Jennifer's expression darkened. Marcus convinced her that you leaving proved you'd never really loved her. That if you had, you would have fought for her. The manipulation was so perfectly calculated that Akiro felt a chill of recognition. Marcus had always been skilled at reading people's insecurities and exploiting them. Emma's deepest fear had been that she wasn't worth fighting for, a legacy of a distant father who died when she was 12, leaving her with a mother who showed love through achievement rather than affection. He proposed 6 weeks after you left, Jennifer continued. Said he wanted to prove that he was the kind of man who didn't abandon the people he loved. And she said yes. She was pregnant. The words hit Akiro like a physical blow. He'd suspected there might be more too. The story, but this revelation recontextualized everything. Emma hadn't just chosen Marcus over him. She'd been trapped by consequences that went far beyond simple attraction. Marcus's child? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Jennifer nodded. But she lost the baby at 12 weeks. Miscarriage. By then they were engaged. The wedding was planned, and she spread her hands helplessly. Emma felt like she'd destroyed so much already. Going through with the marriage seemed like the only way to honor what they'd lost. Akiro closed his eyes, processing the implications. Emma's betrayal had been devastating, but it was beginning to look less like calculated cruelty and more like a series of catastrophic mistakes, compounded by grief and manipulation. The business problems, he said. When did those start? About 18 months ago. Marcus had convinced Victoria to let him handle the major accounts, said it would free up Emma to focus on creative development. But he doesn't have your instincts. Akiro, he's good at selling ideas, but terrible at delivering them. Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed him a series of photograph screenshots of campaigns that Richardson and Associates had produced over the past. The work was technically competent, but soulless, lacking the emotional resonance that had once been the agency's trademark. The Pemberton Group dropped them after Marcus pitched a campaign that completely misunderstood their brand identity. She continued, he'd done his research on paper, but hadn't grasped the deeper emotional connection their customers had with the company. The kind of insight that you always seem to understand instinctively. And Emma, how much creative control did she have? It's less and less. Marcus has a way of making her doubt her own judgment. He'll praise her ideas in private, then subtly undermine them in meetings. Make suggestions that sound collaborative, but actually redirect everything toward his vision. Jennifer's voice carried the frustration of someone who'd watched a gifted friend lose confidence in her own abilities. Akiro remembered Emma's creative instincts, how she could see emotional truths in brand stories that others missed. She'd been the one to suggest the tagline for the Meridian campaign he'd eventually refined and perfected years later. If Marcus had been systematically eroding her confidence, it explained not just the company's decline, but Emma's own diminished presence. The marriage? He said carefully. How is it really? Jennifer's laugh was bitter, miserable. Marcus is charming when things are going well, but when he's under pressure? She shook her head. He blames Emma for the business problems. Says she's not supporting him enough. Makes her feel responsible for every lost client, every failed pitch. The pattern was becoming clear. Marcus had isolated Emma from her support systems, undermined her professional confidence, and made her financially dependent on him through their shared stake in the family business. It was a textbook case of emotional manipulation, designed to keep her trapped in a situation that benefited only him. Why are you telling me this? Akiro asked. Because Emma's too proud to tell you herself, and too broken to see a way out, and because... Hesitated, then met his eyes directly. Because I think you're the only person who can save her. Not just the business, her. That's not my responsibility anymore, isn't it? Jennifer leaned forward. You loved her once? Really loved her. I saw how you looked at her, how you protected her even when she didn't realize she needed protecting. That kind of love doesn't just disappear because someone makes terrible choices." Akiro was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs on Jennifer's phone. The woman in those images eyes at various company events over the past 3 years looked increasingly fragile, her smiles more forced with each passing month. "There's something else," Jennifer said quietly. "Victoria's been talking about early retirement. If the company fails, she'll sell the building and assets to cover debts. Emma would be left with nothing, no job, no inheritance, no way to start. Over and Marcus." She shrugged. "Marcus will find another opportunity, another person to charm and manipulate. He always does." The full scope of the situation was becoming clear. This wasn't just about saving a struggling business, it was about rescuing someone who'd been systematically destroyed by the very person who'd convinced her to betray the one man who might have protected her from that fate. "She doesn't know." "You're telling me this?" Akiro said. God, no, she'd be mortified. Emma spent 3 years trying to convince herself that she made the right choice, that her marriage is worth the price she paid. Admitting the truth would mean acknowledging that she destroyed the best thing in her life. For someone who's been slowly poisoning her ever since, Jennifer finished her wine and stood to leave. "Not asking you to forgive her, Akiro. Not even asking you to save her marriage or make everything go back to the way it was. I'm just asking you to consider that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who were already hurting themselves." She left money on the table and walked away, leaving Akiro alone with the weight of revelations that had transformed his understanding of the past 3 years. Emma wasn't just the woman who'd betrayed him. She was also the victim of someone else's manipulation. Trapped in a situation that was slowly destroying everything she'd once been. The question was no longer whether he was strong enough to face his past. The question was whether he was strong enough to save someone who might not even want to be saved, knowing that doing so might be the most dangerous thing he'd ever attempted. Outside the cafe, the city lights blurred together like stars reflected in troubled water. Beautiful and treacherous, and impossible to navigate without losing yourself in their depths. 3 days later, Akiro stood in the lobby of Richardson and Associates. Watching the morning rush of employees filter through the turnstiles, he'd made his decision during a sleepless night spent walking the streets of his old neighborhood, and now he was here to see firsthand what he'd be inheriting. "Mr. Tsukihara." The voice belonged to Rachel Martinez, a junior account coordinator who'd been fresh out of college when he'd left. She approached with genuine excitement, her face lighting up with recognition. I can't believe it's really you. We heard rumors that you might be coming back. Just visiting today, Rachel. How are things?" Her enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "Well, it's been challenging, but we're all hoping." She glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "We're hoping you might stay. The place hasn't been the same since you left." It was the first of many similar encounters as Victoria led him through the offices. Every few steps, someone would approach designers who remembered his feedback. Sessions, account managers who'd learned strategy from his presentations, junior staff who'd looked up to him as a mentor. Their faces carried the same mixture of hope and desperation, the look of people clinging to the possibility of rescue. The creative department, Victoria said, opening a door to what had once been a buzzing hub of activity, and now it felt hollow. With empty desks scattered throughout and a palpable sense of diminished energy. "We've had to reduce staff by 60% over the past 18 months. Emma looked up from her computer as they entered. She'd been working alone in what used to be a collaborative space for 12 designers, and the isolation was evident in her posture. When she saw Akiro, something flickered across her face. Hope, fear, embarrassment all compressed into a single moment before she composed herself. "Akiro's here to assess our current situation," Victoria explained to the remaining staff. "He'll be reviewing our active projects and meeting with key team members." The announcement sent subtle ripples through the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and Akiro could feel the weight of expectations settling on his shoulders. These people needed more than just a savior. They needed hope that their careers wouldn't become casualties of other people's failures. "The Morrison account," Emma said quietly, approaching with a thick folder. "I thought you might want to see what we're working with." Her fingers brushed his as she handed over the file, and he caught the slight tremor in her hands. Close. He could see the toll the past 3 years had taken the fine lines around her eyes, the tightness in her jaw that spoke of constant stress. She was still beautiful, but it was a fragile beauty now, like glass that had been cracked, but not yet shattered. Emma's been carrying most of the creative load, Victoria added. Marcus handles the client relationships, but the actual work has been mine, Emma finished. For better or worse, Akiro opened the folder and immediately saw the problem. The work was technically competent but safe, lacking the emotional resonance that had once distinguished Richardson and Associates from their competitors. It was the kind of advertising that clients accepted but didn't celebrate, functional but forgettable. The brief called for innovative approaches to healthcare messaging, he said, studying the layouts. This feels more like corporate communications. Marcus felt that innovation was too risky given our recent losses, Emma replied, her voice carefully neutral. He preferred a more conservative approach. The phrase carried layers of subtext. Akiro could hear years of creative compromises in those words, artistic instincts gradually worn down by a partner who valued safety over excellence. He looked at Emma more closely and saw something that made his chest tighten, the particular exhaustion that came from constantly doubting your own abilities. Could I see your original concepts? He asked. Before the revisions, Emma hesitated, glancing toward Victoria. I'm not sure Marcus isn't here, Akiro said, quietly. And I'm asking you directly. Emma pulled another folder from her desk drawer, this one worn and considerably thinner than the others. Inside were rough sketches and handwritten notes. Raw concepts that pulsed with energy the polished presentations had somehow lost. One campaign immediately drew Akiro's attention. A healthcare series that framed medical care not as an industry, but as a sacred trust between healers and their communities. This, Akiro said, lifting the sketch. This is what Morrison was really searching for? You think so? The fragile hope in Emma's voice was almost unbearable. I'm certain. This concept grasps something fundamental. Healthcare isn't about selling products. It's about making promises, building trust, creating the certainty that someone will answer when you call for help. He met her gaze steadily. Why wasn't this the version you presented? Emma's professional mask slipped for just a moment. Marcus called it too conceptual, said clients wanted tangible benefits, not emotional messaging. Marcus was mistaken. The declaration settled over the room like a stone dropped in still water. The remaining staff had abandoned any pretense of working. They'd witnessed variations of this conversation for 3 years running, watching bold ideas get neutered by cautious choices, authentic emotion replaced by corporate jargon. Mr. Tsukihara, a voice from the entrance made everyone turn. Thomas Chen, one of the senior account directors, approached with barely contained relief. I heard you might be considering. We've all been hoping, ... that someone might actually fix this disaster. Akiro supplied. Thomas nodded eagerly. We used to take pride in this place. Our work had impact. Clients came to us because they trusted us to tell their stories in ways that reached real people. Now, ... He gestured helplessly at the sanitized layouts scattered across Emma's desk. Now you're paralyzed by the fear of losing what few clients remain, Akiro concluded, so you play it safe. Exactly. But it's become a vicious cycle. The more conservative our approach, the more forgettable our output becomes. The more forgettable our work, the easier it is for clients to justify choosing cheaper alternatives. It was a perfect diagnosis of Richardson and Associates' spiral into mediocrity. They'd sacrificed their distinctive voice for the illusion of security. Failing to recognize that in advertising, playing it safe was often the riskiest strategy of all. The Henderson Group pitched against us last week, added Jennifer Santos, a media director with 8 years at the company. They then underbid us by 30% and promised the same bland, risk-free work we've been churning out. The client couldn't justify paying our premium for identical mediocrity. The assessment was harsh but accurate. These people had watched their professional homes slowly decay, and they were desperate for someone to acknowledge that their crisis wasn't merely financial, it was existential. Akiro spent the following 2 hours examining active projects, and the pattern was unmistakable. Every campaign showed traces of original thinking that had been systematically dulled by excessive caution. Emma's initial concepts consistently outshone the final products. Her creative instincts sound, but her confidence systematically eroded by constant second-guessing. "Where's Marcus today?" he finally inquired. "Client lunch," Victoria answered. "The Hartwell Group, actually. He's attempting to salvage our pitch for next week." The timing was almost poetic. While Marcus was trying to win back a client using the same timid approach that had been failing for 3 years, Akiro was diagnosing exactly what needed to change. The company didn't need more conservative thinking. It needed to rediscover the boldness that had built its reputation originally, as the office began to clear for lunch. Emma approached him once more. "Those original concepts," she said quietly, "do you genuinely believe they were stronger, or are you just being diplomatic?" "I'm never diplomatic about creative work," Akiro replied. "It's too crucial for diplomacy. Then why? ... She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Why did you stop trusting your own judgment?" She nodded, her eyes glistening with what might have been unshed tears. "Because someone convinced you that your instincts were unreliable. That your ideas were too bold, too emotional, too risky." He paused, studying her expression. "But those are precisely the qualities that made your work exceptional." Emma closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, Akiro glimpsed a spark of the creative passion that had once defined her. "If you do this," she said, "if you actually take control, you let me try again, really try, not just execute someone else's safe compromises. If you're prepared to remember who you used to be, I'm not sure I can, and we'll discover it together." The words surprised them both with their intimacy. For a moment, the professional barrier Akiro had been maintaining wavered, revealing something more complex beneath. Emma moved closer, close enough that he could detect her perfume, different from what she used to wear. Subtler and less assured. "Akiro, there you are." Marcus's voice sliced through the moment like a scalpel. He stood in the doorway, his expensive suit slightly disheveled, his expression calculating as he assessed the scene before him. "I heard you were paying us a visit. How ... thoughtful." The sarcasm was thinly veiled, and Akiro could read the territorial aggression in every line of Marcus's posture. Emma stepped back quickly, the moment of connection shattered. Marcus, Victoria interjected smoothly. "How did the Hartwell lunch proceed?" "Exceptionally well," Marcus replied, though his gaze remained fixed on Akiro. "They're quite enthusiastic about our proven approach. Apparently they've been disappointed by agencies that promised innovation but delivered chaos." The dig was pointed and personal. Marcus was essentially arguing that Akiro's style of creative risk-taking was exactly what Hartwell didn't want. "Interesting," Akiro said mildly. "And when do they make their final decision?" "Next Friday. Though I'm confident we've already won them over." The challenge was clear. Marcus was betting that his safe approach would triumph over whatever Akiro might propose, staking his remaining credibility on the idea that clients preferred predictability over brilliance. It was exactly the kind of bet that Akiro had been hoping Marcus would make. That evening, Akiro returned to his own office to find Sarah Mitchell waiting in the conference room, surrounded by financial projections and market analyses spread across the polished table like battle plans. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, and her expression carried the particular intensity that meant she'd been thinking about something that troubled her deeply. "The Meridian Group called," she said without preamble. "They want to expand their account by 40%. International markets, full rebranding for their European launch." Akiro loosened his tie and took the seat across from her. "That's good news, is it?" Sarah's green eyes studied his face with the kind of scrutiny that made most people uncomfortable. "'Cause I also got calls from 3 other potential clients today. The Morrison Foundation wants us for their awareness campaign. TechFlow is looking for someone to handle their IPO marketing. And Stellar Healthcare, yes, one of the accounts that Richardson lost, they're specifically asking for us." She paused, letting the implications settle between them. "So let me ask you something, Akiro. Why would you consider walking away from the most successful year of our partnership to rescue a company that's been systematically destroying everything that once made it special?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah had arranged the documents with deliberate precision, their agency's projections showing exponential growth. Client testimonials praising their innovative approach, financial statements. That painted a picture of unlimited possibility. It was everything he'd worked for, laid out in stark contrast to the troubled legacy of Richardson and Associates. The Richardson deal would be lucrative, he said carefully. Bullshit. Sarah's response was immediate and sharp. This isn't about money, and we both know it. You could make 10 times what Victoria's offering just by accepting the clients who are already begging to work with us. She stood and moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like against the cityscape. When she spoke again, her voice carried a vulnerability that she rarely allowed others to see. I've been watching you for 3 days, Akiro. Ever since that networking event, you've been different, distant, like you're already halfway out the door. That's not. Let me finish. She turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. I know you better than you think I do. I know that you check your phone every time Emma's name appears in industry news. I know that you still have her business card in your wallet, even though it's 3 years old. And I know that when you look at our success, sometimes you wonder if it means anything because she's not here to see it. The observations hit like physical blows. Sarah had always been perceptive, but this level of insight into his unresolved feelings was both impressive and deeply unsettling. You're psychoanalyzing me, he said. I'm trying to understand the man I've been in love with for 2 years. The admission stopped everything. The ambient noise of the city, the distant hum of the building systems, even his own heartbeat seemed to pause in the wake of her words. Sarah had never been one for dramatic declarations, preferring to show her feelings through actions rather than words. This level of emotional honesty meant she was fighting for something she considered worth the risk. Sarah, let me say this, please. She returned at the table, but remained standing, as if sitting would diminish the importance of what she needed to communicate. I've never asked you about her, not directly. I figured that when you were ready to talk about what happened, you would. But watching you consider throwing away everything we've built for a chance to play savior to the woman who destroyed you, I can't stay silent anymore. Akiro found himself unable to meet her eyes. In the 3 years they'd worked together, Sarah had been his anchor to the present, brilliant, supportive. Someone who believed in his vision without needing to understand every shadow from his past. The idea that he might be betraying that trust felt like a weight settling in his chest. I need to know, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the emotion underneath. Are you still in love with her? The question he'd been avoiding for 3 years. Asked by the person who deserved an honest answer most. Akiro stared at the financial projections on the table numbers that represented security. Growth, a future built on solid ground rather than emotional quicksand. I don't know, he said finally. That's not good enough. It's the only answer I have. He looked up at her then, seeing the pain his honesty had caused. I thought I was over it. Over her, I convinced myself that what I felt was just unfinished business. But seeing her again, seeing what's happened to her is consequences, Sarah said sharply. She made choices, Akiro. She chose Marcus over you. She chose security over love. She chose to build a life that didn't include you. Now that it's falling apart, she wants you to fix it. It's more complicated than that. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like she's using your guilt and your feelings for her to manipulate you into saving her from the mess she made. The accusation sparked something defensive in Akiro. You don't know the whole story. Then tell me. Sarah sat down across from him, leaning forward with the intensity of someone demanding truth.
Ow. Tell me about Emma Richardson.
Tell me why a woman who betrayed you 3 years ago is worth destroying everything we've built together. Akiro was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face. She deserved the truth, even if it might cost him the best partnership professional and personal he'd ever had. Hey, she was my first love, he said quietly. Not just romantically. Professionally, too. We understood each other's creative process in a way that felt rare. When we worked together, we created things that neither of us could have produced alone. Marcus was my best friend since college. Is someone I trusted completely. Finding them together wasn't just heartbreak, it was betrayal on every level that mattered to me. Sarah nodded slowly, processing his words. And now? Now I see that she's been systematically destroyed by the same person who destroyed us. Marcus has spent 3 years undermining her confidence, isolating her from support systems, making her doubt her own instincts. The woman I saw today, she's a shadow of who she used to be. So you want to save her? I want to save the company her mother built. I want to save the jobs of people who believed in something better. And yes, he admitted, I want to save her too. It's not because I think we can go back to what we were, but because watching someone's spirit being systematically broken and doing nothing about it when I have the power to help, that would make me someone I don't want to be. Sarah was silent for several minutes, her fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm that spoke of rapid-fire thinking. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but carried an undertone that made Akiro's stomach clench. The Meridian expansion would require a 6-month commitment in London, full relocation, establishing European operations, building a team from scratch. She met his eyes directly. I've been thinking about accepting it. Without me, if necessary. She gathered the documents in front of her with deliberate precision. I won't sit here and watch you tear yourself apart trying to rescue someone who might not want to be rescued. And I won't compete with a ghost. Sarah, you're not competing with her? Yes, I am, even if you don't see it that way. She stood, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. I love you, Akiro, not just as a partner, but as a man. I've loved your intelligence, your integrity, your ability to see emotional truth in places where others only see surfaces. But I won't love someone who's determined to sacrifice himself on the altar of someone else's mistakes. The ultimatum was gentle, but absolute. Sarah was offering him a choice: the future they could build together, or the past he seemed determined to resurrect. How long do I have? He asked. As long as you need. But understand that every day you spend trying to save Emma Richardson is a day you're not building something real with me. I'm not 25 anymore, Akiro. I don't have unlimited time to wait for someone to choose me over their ghosts. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. There's something else you should consider. Emma Richardson made her choice 3 years ago. She chose passion over stability, excitement over reliability. She chose Marcus. And now that those choices have led to consequences she doesn't like, she's asking you to fix everything for her. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe the kindest thing you could do for both of you is to let her face those consequences. Let her find her own way out of the situation she created. Because if you swoop in to save her now, you'll never know if she's with you because she wants to be or because she needs to be. Sarah left him alone in the conference room, with the weight of her words and the silence of a decision that would determine not just his professional future, but the kind of man he was choosing to become. Outside the windows, the city hummed, with the energy of millions of people making choices, small ones and life-altering ones, selfish ones and selfless ones. The question was no longer whether he could save Emma Richardson. The question was whether saving her was worth losing Sarah Mitchell, and whether his need to be a hero was stronger than his desire to be happy. For the first time in 3 years, Akiro wasn't sure he knew the answer. He spent that night walking the streets of downtown, moving through pools of streetlight like a man haunted by his own indecision. Sarah's words echoed in his mind with the persistence of truth. Maybe the kindest thing you could do for both of you is to let her face those consequences. But every time he tried to accept that wisdom, he saw Emma's face, as it had been that afternoon, fragile, desperate, clinging to the remnants of dreams that someone else had systematically destroyed. By morning, clarity had settled over him, like dawn breaking through fog. Not the kind of clarity that made decisions easy, but the kind that made them inevitable. At exactly 9 a.m., Akiro sat in Richardson and Associates' conference room with Victoria, Emma, and Marcus arranged around. The polished table like players in a game where everyone understood the stakes but no one was certain of the rules. He prepared his terms carefully, knowing that this moment would define not just the future of the company, but the nature of every relationship in the room. I'll do it, he said without preamble, but with conditions that are non-negotiable. Victoria leaned forward slightly, her expression carefully neutral, despite what must have been enormous relief. Name them. First, I assume complete operational control. All creative decisions, all strategic directions, all personnel matters go through me. No exceptions, no committees, no democratic processes. Agreed, Victoria said immediately. Second, Emma reports directly to me as creative director, but Marcus's role needs to be redefined. Akiro's gaze moved deliberately to his former friend. I'm restructuring the account management hierarchy. Marcus will oversee existing client relationships but will have no involvement in new business development or creative strategy. The terms were professionally brutal, but necessary. Akiro was essentially neutering Marcus's influence while keeping him around as a living reminder of what happened when personal relationships interfered with professional judgment. Marcus's face had gone pale, but he managed to keep his voice steady. And if I refuse those terms, then you'll be looking for new employment by the end of the week. Akiro replied calmly. Richardson and Associates can't afford the luxury of ego-driven decision-making anymore. Emma watched this exchange with something approaching wonder, as if seeing Marcus challenged so directly was a revelation in itself. For 3 years, she'd lived with his version of reality where his judgment was unquestionable, and her doubts were evidence of insufficient loyalty. Watching someone else set boundaries with such calm authority was probably the first time she'd seen an alternative to constant accommodation. Third condition, Akiro continued. All existing contracts and commitments are honored, but any new agreements require my approval. This includes the Hartwell Group presentation, which will be completely redesigned according to my specifications. The presentation is next Friday, Marcus protested. There's time to do it right. Akiro's interruption was soft but final. Which brings me to my fourth condition. This arrangement has a 6-month trial period. If the company isn't showing measurable improvement by then, I reserve the right to withdraw my involvement without penalty. Victoria nodded slowly. That seems fair, though I hope it won't come to that. So do I. Akiro opened the folder he'd brought with him, revealing documents that had clearly been prepared by expensive lawyers. These contracts outline the financial arrangements, profit-sharing agreements, and operational structures. I'll need signed copies by end of business today. The speed and thoroughness of his preparation was impressive and slightly intimidating. Akiro hadn't just decided to help, he'd anticipated every possible complication and built safeguards against them. It was the approach of someone who'd learned that good intentions without proper structure led to chaos. Emma finally found her voice. What about personal boundaries? How do we handle the fact that we have history? It was the question everyone had been avoiding, and Akiro appreciated her courage in asking it directly. We handle it professionally, he said, meeting her eyes. What happened between us 3 years ago has no bearing on our working relationship. You're a talented creative director who's been operating under constraints that prevented you from doing your best work. I'm here to remove those constraints and help you remember what you're capable of. The answer was perfect, and it's clinical. Detachment, but Emma seemed to find something reassuring in its clarity. For someone who'd been navigating emotional manipulation for 3 years, the promise of straightforward professional interaction probably felt like relief. And if Emma and I have disagreements about direction, Marcus asked, his voice carrying a subtle challenge, then you'll bring them to me, and I'll make the final decision based on what's best for the company and our clients. Akiro's tone didn't change, but his meaning was unmistakable. This isn't a democracy, Marcus. It's a business that's been failing because too many people thought their personal feelings were more important than professional results. The rebuke was surgical in its precision, cutting away Marcus's ability to use emotional manipulation as a business tool. Emma's posture straightened slightly, as if she was remembering what it felt like to have someone defend professional standards rather than personal agendas. Victoria cleared her throat delicately. There is one other matter we should address. The integration process. How do you envision transitioning your current clients and team? I'm not bringing my current operation here, Akira said, surprising everyone. Tsukihara Creative will remain independent. I'll be working here personally, but my other team will continue handling our existing accounts, including Sarah. Mitchell? Emma asked quietly. Sarah is pursuing other opportunities. The admission cost him more than he let show. She's considering an expansion into European markets. Emma's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt or sympathy. She was smart enough to read between the lines that his decision to help Richardson and associates had come at the cost of his partnership with someone who clearly mattered to him. "Akiro," she said softly, "if this is causing problems in your personal life, maybe my personal life is my concern." He cut her off gently, but firmly. "This is a business decision based on business factors. Nothing more, nothing less." It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. But it was a necessary lie that allowed them all to maintain the fiction that this was about professional rather than personal redemption. Marcus signed the contracts first, his signature sharp. And angry, Emma followed, her hand trembling slightly as she wrote her name. Victoria was last, her signature carrying the weight of someone signing over control of her life's work to someone she hoped she could trust. "When do you start?" Victoria asked. "Now." Akiro gathered the signed documents and stood. "I'll spend today reviewing current projects and meeting with key staff. Tomorrow, we begin restructuring operations.
Emma.
I'll need you to prepare a presentation of all your original concepts from the past year, the ones that didn't make it to final execution. All of them.
Oh, you're right.
Every single one. I want to understand the gap between your creative instincts and what actually got produced." He paused at the door. "And Emma, trust your judgment. If an idea feels right to you creatively, it probably is. The only question is whether we can execute it effectively." After he left, the three remaining members of the Richardson family sat in silence. Marcus looked like a man who'd just been systematically dismantled. Victoria appeared relieved, but exhausted, and Emma seemed caught between hope and terror. "Are we doing the right thing?" Emma asked her mother. Victoria considered the question with the weight of 7 decades of experience. "We're doing the only thing that might save us. Whether it's right, we'll find out." That afternoon, Akiro stood in what would now be his office, the corner space that had once belonged to Emma's father. Overlooking the city that held all their shared history, the symbolism wasn't lost on him. He was taking control of the empire that had shaped him in the room where dreams had been born and died, the power to either rebuild what had been broken or complete its destruction. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "London confirmed. Leaving next month. Take care of yourself, Akiro. You deserve to be happy." He stared at the message for a long time, understanding that he'd just traded his future for his past, his happiness, for his principles, his heart, for his pride. Whether that made him noble or foolish remained to be seen. Outside his window, the city hummed with possibility and regret in equal measure, indifferent to the human dramas playing out in its towers, of glass and ambition. But in this particular tower, on this particular floor, a man was about to discover whether some bridges could be rebuilt, or whether the kindest thing was to let them burn. Outside his window, the city hummed with possibility and regret in equal measure, indifferent to the human dramas playing out in its towers of glass and ambition. But in this particular tower, on this particular floor, a man was about to discover whether some bridges could be rebuilt, or whether the kindest thing was to let them burn. 2 weeks into his tenure as operational director, Akiro had transformed. Richardson and Associates, with the surgical precision of someone who understood exactly what had gone wrong, the empty desks had been filled with freelancers and contract workers. The creative department hummed with renewed energy, and the hallways carried conversations about possibilities rather than just survival. The most dramatic change was Emma herself. "The Morrison account wants to see 3 alternative approaches," she said, spreading layouts across the conference table with an enthusiasm Akiro hadn't seen in years. "But I think we should lead with the covenant concept, the one about healthcare as a promise between communities." Her original idea, refined and expanded into a full campaign that positioned Morrison not as a healthcare provider, but as a guardian of community well-being. It was exactly the kind of emotional truth that Akiro had built his reputation on. And seeing Emma rediscover that instinct felt like watching someone remember how to breathe. "The execution on the print ads is strong," he said, studying the layouts, "but the digital component needs work. The message gets lost in transition between mediums." I was thinking the same thing. Emma pulled out her tablet, showing mock-ups she'd clearly been working on at home. What if we created a series of community portraits? Real families, real stories, but connected by this thread of care that Morrison makes possible. The idea was sophisticated and deeply human. The kind of strategic thinking that required understanding both brand positioning and emotional psychology. 3 years ago, Emma had been capable of this level of work, but had needed guidance to execute it. Fully now, she was developing concepts independently and bringing him solutions rather than problems. That's exactly right, Akiro said. Can you have prototypes ready by Thursday? Already working on them. She smiled, a real smile, not the careful expression he'd grown accustomed to seeing. I called in some favors with photographers who specialize in documentary work, people who understand how to capture authentic moments. It was the kind of proactive thinking that separated good creative directors from exceptional ones. Emma wasn't just executing his vision, she was expanding it with her own insights and resources. Emma. Marcus's voice cut through their collaboration like a discordant note. He stood in the doorway with the particular tension that had become his default expression since the restructuring. Henderson Group is online too. They want to discuss timeline modifications for their fall campaign. Transfer them to client services, Akiro said, without looking up from the layouts. Emma and I are in creative review. The Henderson Group specifically asked for Emma, Marcus pressed. They're concerned about changes to the creative direction and want reassurance from someone with actual authority over creative decisions, Akiro finished, finally meeting Marcus's gaze, which would be me. Transfer the call. Exchange was professional, but carried undertones that everyone in the room understood. Marcus was testing boundaries, looking for ways to reassert his influence by positioning himself as the client's preferred contact. It was exactly the kind of manipulation that had undermined Emma's confidence for 3 years. After Marcus left, Emma was quiet for a moment, staring at the doorway with an expression Akiro couldn't quite read. He's struggling with the new structure, she said finally. He's struggling with not being in control, Akiro corrected. There's a difference. You don't think I should take the call? Henderson has been with us for 5 years. They're nervous about changes. Are you nervous about the creative direction? No, I think what we're developing is significantly stronger than what they originally approved. Then I'll handle their concerns. Your job is to make great work, not to manage client anxiety about great work. The distinction was crucial. For 3 years, Emma had been trained to accommodate client fears and second-guess her own instincts. Akiro was systematically untangling those patterns, giving her permission to trust her creative judgment while he handled the business politics. His phone buzzed with a call from the Henderson Group, and he answered with the calm authority that had made him successful. Mr. Patterson, this is Akiro Tsukihara. I understand you have concerns about the campaign direction. Actually, I think you'll be very pleased with what Emma has developed. The strategic positioning is more sophisticated than our original approach, and the emotional resonance is significantly stronger. Emma listened to his side of the conversation with something approaching wonder. She was hearing someone defend her work with conviction, articulate her vision with clarity, and position her insights as valuable rather than risky. It was probably the first time in years that someone had advocated for her ideas instead of apologizing for them. Thursday at 2 works perfectly, Akiro concluded. Emma will present the concepts. I think you'll see immediately why this direction serves your brand better than a more conventional approach. Excellent. We'll see you then. He ended the call and found Emma staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. He made it sound like the new direction was their idea, she said. Client management is about helping people arrive at the right conclusions in a way that makes them feel smart for choosing them. You created work that's genuinely better than what they originally asked for. My job is to help them see that. Marcus never. She stopped, as if catching herself before making a comparison she wasn't sure she should voice. Marcus never. What? Never made my work sound valuable, even when clients loved it. He'd present it as if we were asking them to take a risk on something unconventional rather than invest in something exceptional. The admission revealed years of systematic undermining disguised as client service. Marcus had been positioning Emma's strongest instincts as liabilities, Teaching clients to see innovation as a favor they were doing the agency rather than a service they were receiving? That's going to change, Akiro said simply. Until 8 that evening, refining concepts and building presentation materials with the kind of collaborative flow that had once made them formidable as a team. Emma's ideas sparked extensions in Akiro's thinking. While his strategic framework gave her insights, structure, and commercial viability, it was the creative partnership he'd missed more than he'd allowed himself to acknowledge. I should go, Emma said finally, gathering her materials as the office emptied around them. Marcus will be wondering where I am. The comment carried weight beyond its surface meaning. After 3 years of marriage, Emma was still accounting for her time to someone who viewed her professional success as a threat to his authority. Does he often question your work schedule? Akiro asked carefully. Emma hesitated, recognizing the dangerous territory the conversation was approaching. He worries about the company, about whether we're making the right decisions. He worries about whether you're making decisions without his input, Akiro corrected. There's a difference. You don't know what our marriage is like. I know what healthy partnerships look like. Professional and personal, the reference. Tsukihara was subtle but unmistakable. People who trust each other don't monitor each other's schedules or question each other's judgment. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at the portfolio of work they'd created together. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I used to be so confident about my ideas. Remember that campaign for the children's hospital? It was so certain that the emotional approach was right, even when everyone said it was too risky. It won a Clio Award because you fought for it, because you helped me believe it was worth fighting for. She looked up at him then, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears. I don't know when I stopped trusting myself, but somewhere along the way, I started second-guessing every instinct, questioning every idea before I even shared it. You're remembering now, Akiro said gently. Today proved that. The Morrison concept, the Henderson solutions, that's all. You. I'm simply creating room for you to trust what you've always known. What if I lose it again? What if I revert to doubting my own instincts? Then we'll navigate through it, however many times it takes. The assurance was professional in nature, but carried hints of something more profound. They were rebuilding more than marketing strategies. They were reconstructing Emma's creative identity and perhaps her understanding of what genuine support actually meant. Emma collected her materials and moved toward the elevator, but she lingered at his office doorway. Akiro, thank you. For having faith in the work, for making it safe to take creative risks again. After her departure, Akiro remained at his desk, studying the concepts they'd crafted together. They were genuinely exceptional, the caliber of work that would restore Richardson and Associates, standing and demonstrate that the company could compete with any agency in the market. But success would introduce its own challenges. Each victory would deepen Marcus's resentment. Every client win would expose his shortcomings. And every moment of creative synergy between Akiro and Emma would strain the professional boundaries they'd carefully constructed. The real question wasn't whether they could produce outstanding work together. The question was whether Marcus would permit them to succeed, or whether his pride would drive him to dismantle what they were creating before it could threaten his remaining authority. Outside, the city lights merged into a constellation of possibility, alluring, and hazardous, and impossible to navigate without risking everything. But for the first time in 3 years, Akiro felt he might possess the strength to chart a course through the uncertainty. That strength would face its first real test much sooner than expected. The Hartwell Group presentation was set for 10 o'clock a.m. on Friday, and by 9:45, the conference room had been arranged with exacting precision. Emma's redesigned campaign materials were mounted on easels throughout the space, sophisticated, emotionally compelling work that positioned Hartwell as innovators in community healthcare rather than merely another medical services company. It represented everything Richardson and Associates had once been renowned for, enhanced by 3 years of hard-earned experience. Marcus had been conspicuously absent from the preparation, claiming he was managing last-minute client communications. Akiro had permitted this charade, understanding that Marcus's participation would only undermine the presentation's impact. At 9:50, as Akiro made final adjustments to the display boards, Marcus materialized in the doorway with an expression that immediately triggered alarm. "We have a complication," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the particular cadence of someone delivering news they believed would be catastrophic. "I just finished speaking with James Hartwell personally. They've decided to delay the presentation." Emma glanced up from her notes, bewilderment crossing her features. "Delay? For what reason?" "Apparently they've received troubling information regarding our agency's stability. Concerns about leadership transitions, financial sustainability, that sort of thing." Marcus's smile was razor-sharp, predatory. "They want time to evaluate whether we're the appropriate choice for their long-term objectives." 8. The ramifications were immediate and devastating. The Hartwell account represented $12 million in annual revenue sufficient to stabilize. Richardson and Associates' finances improved, the company could thrive under new leadership. Losing it would mean beginning again from a position of vulnerability. "What kind of information?" Akiro asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Industry speculation. Questions about our creative director's personal circumstances affecting her professional capabilities. Doubts about whether bringing in external leadership signals strength or desperation." The assault was surgically precise. Marcus had weaponized the very personal complexities that made Akiro's involvement emotionally fraught, transforming Richardson and Associates' salvation into evidence of instability. "You spoke with them," Emma said, understanding crystallizing in her voice. "You're the one who planted these concerns about our stability." "I provided honest assessments of our circumstances," Marcus replied smoothly. "Hartwell deserves transparency about what they're entering into. You sabotaged your own company's presentation. I protected Hartwell from making a decision they might later regret. Our creative output might be impressive, but if the leadership foundation is fundamentally unstable, the leadership foundation is the most solid it's been in 3 years. Akiro cut in, his composure beginning to fracture. "Unless someone is actively working to destabilize it." Marcus turned to confront him directly, and for the first time in weeks, his veneer of professional courtesy cracked entirely. What emerged was raw desperation mixed with vengeful satisfaction. "You think you can simply return to our lives and repair everything? Take control of my company, monopolize my wife's attention, make everyone believe you're some kind of savior. Your company." Emma's voice was soft but carried the impact of a revelation. "Marcus, this was never your company. It was my mother's company, my family's heritage. You were supposed to help protect it, not destroy it to feed your ego. I've invested 3 years of my life in this place." "You've spent 3 years dismantling everything that made it extraordinary," Emma countered, her own anger finally. "Erupting every creative risk I wanted to pursue, you labeled it reckless. Every client relationship I tried to nurture, you said I was being too emotional. You convinced me that my judgment was flawed so consistently that I stopped trusting it entirely." The confrontation had transcended business into the realm of their marriage. 3 years of accumulated resentment and manipulation finally exploding into the open, because your judgment was flawed. Marcus's voice escalated to near shouting. "You chose him over me once, remember? If I hadn't fought for our relationship, if I hadn't shown you what genuine commitment looked like, genuine commitment." Emma's laugh was harsh and devastating. "You mean manipulating me into pregnancy so I'd feel obligated to marry you? Using my guilt and grief to isolate me from anyone who might have helped me see what you were really doing?" The accusation landed like a physical blow. Akiro watched Marcus's expression cycle through shock, fury, and finally a kind of desperate calculation. "That's not... Emma, you know that's not what happened, isn't it?" As Emma rose, her composure replaced by a clarity that was both terrible and magnificent. "The pregnancy that conveniently occurred right after you realized Akiro was never returning? The miscarriage that you somehow transformed into proof that I needed to honor our lost future by proceeding with the wedding? You're distorting history. I'm finally seeing it with perfect clarity." Emma turned to Akiro, her eyes bright with tears but her voice unwavering. "It's been manipulating my reality for 3 years. It's making me believe that my judgment was compromised, that my creative instincts were too dangerous, that my emotional responses were signs of instability rather than insight. Akiro felt a surge of protective fury unlike anything he'd experienced since discovering them together 3 years ago. But this time, the anger was pure righteous rather than bitter, focused on justice rather than revenge. "Call Hartwell back," he said to Marcus, his voice carrying absolute command. "Tell them the presentation will proceed as scheduled. Not calling anyone. You don't issue orders to me. Actually, I do. As operational director of this company, I'm directing you to repair the damage you've inflicted on our client relationship immediately. And if I refuse?" Victoria Richardson's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Then you're fired." She stood in the doorway, having clearly heard enough of the confrontation to understand its implications. At 71, the family matriarch looked every inch the woman who had built an empire through shrewd decisions and unwavering principle. Victoria Marcus began. "No." Her voice carried the finality of decades of leadership. "I've watched you systematically destroy my daughter's confidence and my company's reputation. I've tolerated it because I hoped you would grow into the role, but this..." She gestured at the sabotaged presentation materials. "This is deliberate. Sabotage of our survival." "You're choosing him over family?" Marcus said desperately, playing his last card. "I'm choosing competence over ego," Victoria replied, "and my daughter's well-being over your insecurity." Emma stepped forward, her decision crystallizing in real time. "I want a divorce, Marcus. I should have asked for one 3 years ago, but I was too broken to see that staying was just another form of running away." The words transformed the room's entire dynamic. Emma wasn't just standing up to Marcus's professionally. She was reclaiming her life entirely. Marcus looked around the room at the three people who had just systematically dismantled his remaining power, his face cycling through rage, disbelief, and finally a kind of hollow defeat. "You'll regret this," he said finally, gathering what dignity he could manage. "All of you." He walked out, leaving behind only the echo of his threats and the sudden profound silence of a crisis finally resolved. He walked out, leaving behind only the echo of his threats and the sudden profound silence of a crisis finally resolved. 6 months later, Richardson and Associates occupied 2 full floors of their building, the empty desks replaced by the controlled chaos of a thriving creative agency. The Hartwell Group had not only kept their account after witnessing Emma's brilliant presentation, but had recommended Richardson to 3 other healthcare companies. The agency's reputation was stronger than it had ever been. Emma stood in the main creative space, reviewing portfolios with the kind of confident authority that came from rediscovered trust in her own judgment. She looked different, lighter somehow, as if the weight of constant self-doubt had been lifted from her shoulders. Her divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, and with it had come a freedom she'd forgotten she was capable of feeling. The Morrison campaign just won the Healthcare Marketing Award, she announced to the room, holding up her phone with the industry notification. Best Emotional Resonance category. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Everyone in the room understood that Emma's creative renaissance had been the driving force behind their collective success. Under Akiro's leadership, she'd blossomed into the creative director she'd always had the potential to become. Akiro emerged from his office, drawn by the celebration. In 6 months, he'd proven that his success hadn't been a fluke. Richardson and Associates was now more profitable and creatively respected than it had been in its original heyday. But success had come with its own form of loneliness. "Congratulations," he said to Emma, his professional warmth genuine but carefully controlled. "Thank you, though I think we both know this award belongs to the team." She paused, studying his face with the perceptiveness that had always been her strength. "Have you heard from Sarah? She's doing well in London. The European expansion is ahead of schedule." "That's not what I asked." Akiro was quiet for a moment. Sarah had sent birthday wishes and occasional updates about her work, but their communications carried the polite distance of former colleagues rather than former partners. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt, no matter how much you regretted the fire. "She's building something important there," he said finally. "Something that doesn't include complications from my past." Emma nodded slowly, understanding the subtext. "And are you happy here?" It was a complex question. He was professionally fulfilled, personally respected, and financially successful. Richardson and Associates was thriving under his leadership. Emma had become the creative force he'd always believed she could be. But happiness was a more elusive measure. "I'm content," he said, "and that might be enough." Content. Repeated the word as if testing its weight. "You know, 3 years ago I thought contentment was settling. Now I think it might be wisdom." Victoria appeared in the doorway of her office, gesturing for them both to join her. At 71, she'd found a new energy in semi-retirement. Watching her company flourish under leadership, she finally trusted completely. "Been thinking," she said, as they settled into chairs across from her desk, "about succession planning. About what this company becomes when I'm no longer here to oversee it." Akiro and Emma exchanged glances. They'd both assumed this conversation would come eventually. But Victoria's timing suggested she'd been planning this moment carefully. "I'm proposing that you two become equal partners," Victoria continued. "Full ownership transfer over the next 5 years. Emma as creative director and eventual CEO, Akiro as chief strategy officer, with complete operational authority." The proposal was generous and logical, recognizing both their contributions and their complementary strengths. But it also meant committing to a future that would intertwine their lives permanently, professionally if not personally. "We work well together," Emma said carefully. "The question is whether we can continue to do so without reopening wounds that have finally healed," Akiro finished. Victoria smiled. Expression of someone who'd spent 70 years watching people navigate the complicated intersection of business and emotion. "Some wounds heal into scars," she said. "And scars properly managed can be stronger than the original skin. The question isn't whether you can avoid complications, it's whether you're both mature enough to handle them. Professionally." Outside the windows, the city sprawled beneath them. Indifferent to their small human drama, but somehow benedictory in its endless possibility. 3 years ago, betrayal had scattered them all like leaves in a storm. Now they were choosing to build something new from the scattered pieces. Not a restoration of what had been lost, but a creation of what might yet be possible. "Partners," Emma said finally, extending her hand across Victoria's desk. "Partners," Akiro agreed, taking it. The handshake was firm, professional, completely free of the romantic undertones that had once complicated everything between them. They had learned, through pain and growth and hard-won wisdom, that some forms of love transcended romance, that partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose could be more lasting than passion. It wasn't the ending any of them had imagined 3 years ago, but it was, perhaps, the ending they all needed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.